It's 9:01 on the 20th of May, 2022. It's the news of the week. Welcome to the Entity News of the Week. Good morning, Jen. Good evening, Jen. All right. So,
good evening. It is the 19th, 9 p.m. in the evening.
Right. You're on the evening, so good evening. The news of the week. We've got quite some crazy stories to go over this week. Quite a busy week. So, the Buffalo shooting. There's a shooting
Yes,
in Buffalo,
indeed.
the supremacist Buffalo shooting. Also, another shooting in the U.S. in Laguna Woods, as well, of course, as then the surrender or evacuation of the Azov regiment and other fighters in Mariupol. We'll also be talking about river crossing at Severodonetsk in the Ukraine conflict. A statement from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Turkey blocking Sweden and Finland's attempt to join NATO, as well as perhaps Croatia. The US invading Somalia now, recently. 1.7 billion people could be pushed into hunger and poverty, according to Antonio Guterres, due to the Ukraine conflict. India is going to limit its wheat exports. Sri Lanka, we're going to be reading an article about Sri Lanka from the communists. And then bird flu and monkeypox. Quite a hectic week. So Buffalo shooting, Jen. Let's talk about this. So go ahead. Do you get that, Jen? Hello? Can you hear me at all? Hello?
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me? Okay, we seem to be having a little bit of a technical problem.
There we go. Yeah, there is literally a lightning storm going on, so connection's not stable.
Okay. Buffalo shooting.
Yeah, so I assume the last time I heard you, we are going to talk about the two shootings in the United States first.
Right, that's it. Buffalo shooting, yeah, Buffalo shooting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so there were two shootings. In fact, it started happening right after we finished our episode last week. It happened the day after, right? So there was one shooting in Buffalo, New York, on the East Coast, and then another in Los Angeles. One is in a grocery store in a majority Black community. Another is a Presbyterian church. So the first case in the Buffalo shooting is definitely racially motivated, and a part of this. So this shooter is this 18-year-old guy. Me personally, I dug up his manifesto and read through the whole thing. It's 180 plus pages long, a lot of just spams and useless info, memes. Some of it reads like a shopping guide of like surplus military goods and advice for guns, what guns to use, et cetera, that kind of stuff. But on the political side of things, at the level of conception, is just straight up neo-Nazi Azov kind of thing, with this very like National Socialist bandera kind of thing, where he wears the black sun Nazi symbol on his chest. He comes from this kind of like ethnic total war mindset, that started ever since literally Nazi Germany, and he essentially, how would I say, it's a very weird blend of from the perspective of psychoanalysis, this is just a guy that is a pervert, so to speak, where it is like his own insistence, his own mental picture on how the world works, not how the world actually objectively works. Yeah. And so he wants to impose that imagination that gives him validation onto the world in the form of course, we know what happened, senselessly killing a bunch of innocent people in a grocery store in a majority, poor black neighborhood. There are a lot of poor black neighborhoods that does not have grocery stores, a food desert. So, despite, capitalism and all that, to even just to be able to have a grocery store is, a huge blessing, quote unquote, for a lot of these poorer neighborhood. Doesn't matter your skin color, right? And for him to just be like doing all this is like, just so, I mean, morally just extremely wrong on so many levels. We can talk about all the implications, but on a materialistic level, like, this is the result of what happens when you tolerate actual Nazism in order to fight again, in order to keep up the fight for imperialism.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, like liberalism and imperialism has always done that. They've always done it in the past. History has proven that again and again. Stalin talks about liberals being the left wing of fascism and how they always cover for the actual right wing of fascism, which is and in defense of capitalism against essentially any anti-imperialist force in the world. In this case, would be Russia. This is like when you tolerate that kind of ideology, and when you give them platform over, people that are actually anti-imperialist, this is what you get. It's the same ideology. Go read the thing, I guess.
Right. 100%.
Yeah. So on the any thoughts about this? I mean, that's him there.
That's it. Yeah. So I mean, this is a particularly another awkward moment for Biden. So Biden, makes the statement that white supremacy, the ideology of white supremacy, is a poison in our society and must be, stopped and wiped out. And people that promote this, people that support this, they should stop.
But Azov is just
Azov, right? So that's exactly it. Azov battalion, right? Here it is. So NATO sends arms and money to Azov, and like the same damn symbol is on this kid's chest. Like, this is the black sun. There it is. And I mean, of course, we've discussed the the lightning bolts and all this stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, I've read somewhere this is designed by Heinrich Himmler. So I mean, I don't know how more Naziist do you want?
His whole Nazi mysticism thing. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So
it's supposed to be a symbol of demonic worship as well. So if anyone is religious, like, you should also be against this. It's literally supposed to represent the infinite portal to hell. That is that the sun is a Cthulhu entity, a black hole hanging in the sky as a infinite portal of like dark magical power. That's from a spiritual angle what that's supposed to be, which is just an absolutely insane load of shit.
So I want to read.
Now I'd like to talk about the other shooting.
Wait, one second. So I just want to read. So it's called the Black Sun, or the Sonnenrad, employed in Nazi Germany and later by neo-Nazi. As you said, it's 12 radial SIG runes, similar to ones employed by the SS. It appeared in Nazi Germany as a design element in a castle at Wewelsburg, remodeled and expanded by the head of the SSS, Heinrich Himmler, which he intended to be a center for the SS. Okay, so it's very much tied to Heinrich Himmler. Like, there's a symbol on their castle, and all sorts of other stuff.
It's like that one scene from Star Wars with Master Windu versus Palpatine, when he turned from the senator into the emperor, right? Like that one scene, like, I am weak, don't kill me, infinite power, with infinite electric dark side of the force power. Yeah, that's what that symbol is supposed to represent, and it's supposed to represent that the master race has infinite power. I mean, we know that through the victory of the Soviet Union in in the 1940s on Reichstag, that they actually don't have infinite power, so we don't need to worry about that. But if they did, we would be in a lot of trouble.
Let's move on to the Laguna shooting, right? So this guy, also another shooting in the U.S. He killed 5 people.
I think we should move on to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the other shooting.
See, like, this is the thing, right? These things are filled with political kind of distortions and ops, right? Especially this next shooting we're going to be talking about, which is at the Geneva Presbyterian Church in Orange County, Los Angeles, where well, it's a Taiwanese church, and I say that because oftentimes they don't agree with themselves with the idea of being like the greater idea of being Chinese, if they choose, to like organizing a community like that. But and it is a shooting by a 60-plus-year-old Taiwanese man born in the United States, went back to Taiwan, and went back to the United States, and lived the majority of his life as an American. A very Americanized, American Asian kind of name with an American Asian way of spelling the name as well. It's not a
David Cho,
grammatically
right?
Chinese way of spelling your own name, right? Such a guy, due to some reason, went and shot up a church community that I assume is like, he at least has to know on a personal basis. We'll wait for the investigation reports to come out as to like why. Being old and very incompetent, luckily only killed few, and the other that one were injured were still alive. Got tackled down by a very brave person, and was hog-tied up. So already incompetent. But then the Western media, American media, immediately threw this to be like against Taiwanese, China against Taiwan kind of thing. Well,
Yes.
okay, so first of all, Taiwanese doesn't constitute an ethnicity. Sure, it can constitute some sort of political kind of sense.
Sure.
But then again, this is not a politically motivated thing. We've just explained to you that they're very likely politically more or less the same team, the shooter and the victims. So yeah, for this, so. What are your thoughts, Richard? Before, I'd like to take this as like a insert point where we can deep dive into the political ethos of China, Taiwan, and the U.S.
Sure.
Politics.
Yeah. So
first, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Right. So we had a request from a viewer last week to just talk about Taiwan briefly. So yeah, as you already said, this event was tried to drag the China, Taiwan, U.S. geopolitics. Somehow this was related. And as you already mentioned, the guy was born in the U.S., then moved to Taiwan, lived there for a while, then moved back to the U.S. So he has, I think, little to perhaps no connection to China mainland. If it's politically motivated, I mean, I haven't seen it yet. Only part of the politics has been played by Western politicians, sort of trying to draw this thing in. And like, I think with that whole conversation about Taiwan, it's very much U.S. politicians that are very keen on trying to not lose focus on the confrontation with China. So right now there's the confrontation with Russia via Ukraine and NATO, but you'll have politicians openly saying that don't lose your eye on the ball. The big enemy here, the big dog, is China. We need to focus on this conflict with China. Don't forget the Pacific. Don't forget the Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, right? So, I mean, this seems like quite a ham-fisted attempt to bring that back in. Those are my thoughts on it. But so I don't know if you see that in relation to Taiwan here on this one.
So, there are a few aspects to cover. So, in China, we always say the 帝国主义亡我心不死. The imperialist heart desire of wanting us dead does not die. This is a quote that Mao said, and it's still holding true today, right? So first of all, there is the from inside members of the Chinese Ministry of State Security, who said that starting this summer, towards the end of this year, China, the West is currently taking this opportunity to sabotage and weaken China and infiltrate and damage China however it can, starting this summer until the end of this year. And China is going to very likely be narratively and on a security level attacked from both fronts. The West, with India, is probably going to start some shenanigans again. There's going to be the Xinjiang, Tibet, Xizang shit again. And then from the east, there's going to be, drama about Chinese coastal cities, along with Japan, South Korea, and the American military harassing, just 24/7, China. And then there's going to be some sort of diplomatic tension.
Yeah.
This is an inside kind of intelligence source that's already pointing at this. And so we can already see this, right? So setting this up to be a China versus Taiwan thing immediately at the level of context and implications, as well as the actual content, and which is all started thanks to the Taiwanese DPP, the Green Party, which is the it's effectively a Ukraine situation, where you can think of like Tsai Ing-wen at their current president as basically Zelensky, where it's a populist, borderline Nazi kind of thing about essentially where the whole deal is to turn like Taiwanese indigenous sentiment against the nationalists, who invaded essentially and did a whole bunch of atrocities on Taiwanese local indigenous people during the 50s to towards the 80s. To turn that sentiment against just like hatred against mainland China, which is like literally the antithesis of who oppressed them, by the way. The whole Chinese idea of being China itself, right? And they do it through very like Fox News versus CNN, stupid extremism kind of tactics in news and commentating, right? It's very inobjective. It's very like 20 panelists shouting to the screen simultaneously kind of politics and news, the kind of clickbaity stuff that will get you like it's that will keep your blood pressure going in no time.
Right. I'd say one thing that's Taiwan.
So since there is such like no respect for objectivity of news, right? In Taiwan, actually, this whole shooting, because it's done by Taiwanese people against Taiwanese people in America, which is like basically their ideological sugar daddy, essentially. So like, of course, it's going to be huge news there, right? And then they have this tactic, narrative tactic of just blame PRC as the boogeyman. Literally anything bad that's happened to them is a psyop, is a sabotage, is a cyber attack, is a what they call a cognitive warfare.
Taiwan syndrome, maybe we call it Taiwan syndrome. China. I'm
really
referencing
sad,
Havana syndrome.
And then the United States, American news, of course, cites that as like a legitimate source. Where really it's just like if you read Chinese, you can just tell it's a bunch of clickbait people shouting on the screen. Which is what they've been doing for the past 30 years, mind you, right? Yeah. So
I think
some of our viewers asked us to talk about.
My final thoughts to add this one is just that the U.S. does not have time on its hand in relation to the Taiwan question. It will be resolved by China and Taiwan. And economically, like I think the economics of the relationship will define as time goes on, as the Chinese economy grows and, the integration expands between China and Taiwan. I mean, I know politically right now, they're, like you said, there's this party in power. They're quite right wing. They're anti-mainland and all this kind of stuff. But if you look at on the economic side, the integration between the two only ever gets stronger. And as time goes on, that, relationship only grows. So, maybe you have a two countries, one system or whatever kind of arrangement. Two countries, one system.
Yeah, because on a civilizational conceptual level, there is still plenty of wise people in Taiwan that may not necessarily be communists. They might be like Christian or a Buddhist or what have you, that still is like pro-China, because they are for the civilizational idea of China, the Middle Kingdom, and all of that. It's still a hugely like a present sentiment there, right? Which is being kind of destroyed by what Taiwanese is currently pushing for, like a very American thing. It's called the depatternization of history education. So when teaching history from elementary school all the way to high school, they are now pushing for a way of like depatternizing, as in like destroy the cause and effect chain of where things came from and where things ended up, to essentially scramble and randomize the education of history into just like trivial, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means that you will have like Guan Yu, the Chinese, one of the Chinese war gods, Hercules-like figure, versus Hercules versus Napoleon versus I don't know, Hitler or some crap. That's what depatternized education of history means. It turns, it's one, great man history. It's a non-systematic. And two, it's this kind of like, I don't know, like Pokemon Yu-Gi-Oh kind of mentality, where one historical figure with a stat card versus another historical figure with a stat card, right?
Right.
And this has been like what history education has become in Taiwan, right? And they don't explain where the civilizational history of the Taiwanese people, like post-settler or indigenous, like even came from, which both came from the Chinese civilization, by the way. They don't talk about any of those like higher philosophical concepts anymore. They don't even talk about what is the basics of Confucianism in like a bulletin point. Like they don't even talk about that anymore. So it's of course you can see how this kind of education contributes to a historical pro-imperialist propaganda brainwashing, right?
Right.
If there's anyone that's actually doing cognitive warfare, it's them and the United States. But yeah.
Right. In a sense, there's actually a kind of a similarity between the first shooting and the second shooting, in that the first shooting, Biden fails to recognize the relationship between the Black Sun symbology and the ideology of the shooter in Buffalo and Azov Battalion, whereas in the second shooting, or the second conversation, let's say, the Taiwanese government fails to recognize their own historical origins of the fact that they are Chinese. But the question I really want to ask you, Ken, is the shooter in Laguna, when they hogtied him, did they evacuate him or did he surrender? That's the big question we have to ask ourselves. I don't know if you got that.
I'm sorry. What did they what?
Oh, okay. No, I said, I said in the Laguna shooting, when they hogtied him, did they evacuate him or did he surrender?
They tackled him down and tied him up, and the suspect.
I think the audio is not getting through. I think the audio is not getting through. I was saying, did they evacuate him or did he surrender? So I'm obviously referencing Mariupol and the Azov Battalion. I don't know if you can get that or not. I don't know how much this audio is coming through.
Well, yeah. Speaking with surrendering.
Yes.
Yeah. What a theme. What a transition.
Okay. Yeah. So Mariupol. Mariupol. To Ukraine and Mariupol.
In the Azovstal, steel plant. Yeah. The massive 6-story nuclear bunker complex. The Nazis surrendered. Like literally, like we should be playing the Soviet anthem right now, because like that's the song you play when the Nazis surrender, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all like 1,730 of them are just like, sent on buses and just like wet. Which like, the whole. I mean, this like once again shows like the kind of rather merciful approach that Russia has taken to this whole conflict, because like you could, as we said, it's there's a lot of bodies of water in Ukraine. You could just like divert a river towards the steel factory plant and just drown everyone in there. That's an option. gas everything in there, find every hole and deplete their oxygen. Like these are all things they could have done, or even better, just blow up every hole, every exit, and seal it up with a concrete and rebars. That's also an option. But Russia didn't do that. Instead, every single one of them came out and became POWs and are unhurt. They just like locked themselves into a prison for like a month.
Right. So there's a lot of points to make about this one. So
crimes, that is extremely merciful. Like, and make no mistake, it's a surrender. We gave up arms. It's a ceasefire. We were transported to Russia. We are transported to Russian POW camps. We are treated as POWs.
Transferred.
But that's not a surrender. It's an evacuation, according to the
list. Right. So this is the thing, right? So this word surrender. So this is why we made this the title of this episode, because it's ridiculous. Like, so this is proper sort of like Orwell. Words are what you say they mean. They don't really mean what they mean. The idea of an evacuation and a corridor. So again, as you said, they lay down their arms. The Russians then search them. They give up their position. They are then taken into trucks and buses run by the Russians or the DPR forces, driven to a camp of the Russians choosing in Russian territory or DPR territory. And then they're, I guess, questioned. And some of them are going probably, like, there's this push in Parliament, Russian Parliament, the Duma, to make the Azov battalion into a terrorist organization. So if that passes, then these guys will be treated as terrorists, and the Azov particular hardcore, like, Nazi tattoo proper hardcore members will be treated as, or trialed as, terrorists. I assume there will be an exchange of prisoners at some point. But again, this whole idea of like a negotiation about the fact that there was an evacuation, they're being swapped for prisoners. So if they're being swapped for prisoners, what are they? They are prisoners. And also the word corridor. So like this clever, not even clever, this like foolish use of the word corridor. So like a corridor is a neutral space where a third party or your own guys can come.
Himmler, I mean, this is just like Goebbels and Himmler style propaganda. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing, though, you already mentioned, Finn, is like the fact that, the Russians could have just blown the whole place up and just sank the whole thing and just poured water in there and just done some pretty brutal stuff. It's war. I guess you.
Yeah, I asked my Chinese family who were in the PLA back in the 60s to the 80s about this. They told me that the simplest tactic that you can use for this is just literally like get all the all the military attack dogs you have, strap timed explosives to them, let them loose because they charge at people, and then they will charge at people, and the bombs will blow up. And it can kill everyone, and you don't have to lose a single soldier. That is what the PLA back in the 70s would have done for stuff like this.
Yeah, that's another way. I mean, there's also like high tech options. You could have used like drones and robots and all kinds of stuff, and then just normal dynamite charges and stuff. Yeah. And there's a lot of options. Yeah, but I mean, The thing about that though is that there's a lot of PR. So the optics, the narrative of this, right? So for example, the concept of surrendering, of course, is why they didn't use this term, right? So for mainstream media to talk about Ukrainian forces surrendering, that means then soldiers that are wavering across the Ukrainian sort of front on Donbass now will hear about the godly Azov regiment, the 300 Spartans surrendering. So the idea of fighting to the death is kind of undermined, because if the Azov guys, the heroes of Mariupol, have surrendered, then why should I be fighting? And also the other thing is, even if you use the word evacuate and exchange, it opens the idea that Ukraine is willing to give territory to Russia in an exchange. So it already normalizes the concept of, okay, we're Ukraine, we're going to fight for every inch of our territory, crush the invader, but if you now have an exchange, we go, okay, give us 10 guys for 100 square meters or whatever it is, give us, we'll give you Azov style if you give us X amount of people. It says, publicly, sort of implicitly as well, that we are willing to exchange territory we're willing to concede territory to you, the invader. So it really crushes a lot of like the big set pieces of the narrative, like the narrative of don't surrender and the narrative of don't give up the land. Those are both undermined by this act, by this defeat. Like, and by even if we say it's an exchange and it's an evacuation, it doesn't matter because it still shows concession of land to the invader and concession of soldiers. Soldiers can surrender. That's what it publicly shows, which is a very big point. One thing I want to quote was there's a guy called Alexander Mercouris of the Duran, pretty big podcast, Geopolitics, and he says that the reason that the Russians haven't attacked Zaporizhia, and I've been trying to check into this to see how true this is, to what extent, is because they have a huge car manufacturing plant there, and the Russians won't go there because the factory is owned by the Chinese, which is an interesting point. But and other things to discuss in terms of this. I don't know. Any other thoughts on the Ukraine? Any other updates you want to make on Ukraine situation?
Well, I mean, so we follow Defense Politics Asia, and there has been a lot of surrendering of Ukrainian troops again in the Luhansk front, and Russian forces have once again made a breakthrough at certain pockets. But Russia has also used a long-range missile to struck two training facility weapons stockpile type deal with one in and around outside of Kiev, and the other like on the Polish border again, just recently, just of yesterday, I believe. And it was quite it struck the reserves, the NATO instructors and trainers, and the weapon supplies with missile hits. So yeah, that's the update essentially. And again, right. Yes, please go subscribe to Defense Politics Asia.
Yeah, great channel, great guys. Some very big fans of their work. I think there was a river crossing in Severodonetsk, which it's not a major event. The Russians did lose a number of armored vehicles. A successful counterattack by the Ukrainians. So Severodonetsk is just north of the last city being held by the Ukrainians in Luhansk. So it's an important crossing. A number of Russian tanks were destroyed. There's a lot of footage on that. I still think they had a successful crossing, though. They still managed to cross. So yes, but pretty costly.
Yeah, it's a river crossing. A river crossing is you have an obstacle in the middle called the river, right? That is a hyper kind of fixated point where all of a sudden the weapon systems, short, medium, long range, from both sides, can just kind of hyperfixate on this one point. And, when lots of things that go boom of all varieties are fixated on this one point, then, you're going to take a lot of casualties during river crossing. That's because there is likely only one place that is suitable for crossing, and you're going at fairly slow speeds no matter what means of transportation you use. So it's something that is just inevitably would have happened, right? And here's we always have a tendency to hyperfixate on Russian casualties, as if they're supposed to have like a magical force field around them. But there's just one problem. You never see like people cheering on like Ukrainian casualties, and yet if you talk about Russian victories, you get banned from platforms such as Twitch and PayPal and Patreon. A lot of the friends and comrades at the CPI had this just recently happened to them. That's all. Yeah,
I think for this one though, in terms of communist news or news from communist parties, there's a statement here from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation that one of our colleagues has shared, and I think we should read this. It's from May 16th. It's a direct answer or direct reply to the KKE. So if you have been following our show, you know that the KKE has taken a particular opinion on the war and are calling the Russians imperialist in this conflict. So I'm actually we're going to read this and then just discuss it. So it's a little bit long. I don't know if I'll be able to cover it. Well, let's see how it goes. Let's just see how it goes. We'll try and skim some parts. So comments on the article of the International Department of the CCKKE on the imperialist war in Ukraine and the stance of the CPRF. I assume you can see this then, Jen, right? Sorry, I'm share screening, so I can't really see it, right? Okay, I'm going to assume that you can see it. Okay, so on April 23rd, 2022, the newspaper Rizos Pastis, the organ of the Communist Party of Greece, carried an article by the International Department of the CCKKE on the imperialist war in Ukraine and the stance of the CPRF. The article assesses the actions of the CPRF in connection with the special operation Russia is conducting in Ukraine openly, accusing the party of having a pro-government, i.e. pro-imperialist position. We categorically disagree with this utilitarian assessment. The gist of the article is that, in the opinion of the Greek comrades, what is taking place in Ukraine is an imperialist war in the interests of the Russian bourgeoisie. And therefore, by supporting the special operation, the CPRF is advocating a policy that is in line with the ruling United Russia Party and President Putin. So this is from the Greeks then. In insisting on the imperialist character of this war, the Greek comrades proceed from Lenin's well-known thesis that, quote, a struggle for markets and for freedom to loot foreign countries, a striving to suppress the revolutionary movement of the proletariat and democracy in the individual countries, a desire to deceive, disunite, and slaughter the proletarians of all countries by setting the wage slaves of one nation against those of another so as to benefit the bourgeoisie. These are the only real content and significance of the war. However, the comrades did not mention that this statement is contained in Lenin's work, War 1914-1918. It specifically refers to the First World War, which was indeed a purely imperialistic war of conquest. However, leaving dogma aside, we have to admit that any war has its own specific characteristics. Okay, the Marxists' task in determining one's position with regard to the war is to determine its character. In addition to imperialist wars, there are national liberation and anti-fascist wars, which have become widespread in the mid-20th century when fascism and Nazism emerged as political phenomenon and national liberation struggles intensified under the impact of the October Revolution. What guided the CPRF in determining its stand? Okay, so in working out its political position on the issue of the conduct of the special operation, the party analyzed the concrete historical conditions which objectively led to the crisis in Ukraine. Before the October Revolution, Ukraine, which was part of the Russian Empire, was a typical agrarian country. To strengthen its industry, 6 industrial areas of the RSFSR in the east and south, which had never been parts of Ukraine, were included in Ukraine. Among them were the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. In 1939, Galicia, western Ukraine, previously part of Poland, was added to Ukraine. Thus, the present territory of Ukraine is the result of it becoming part of the USSR. It has been sewn together from disparate patches, from Galicia, Lvov, which were under heavy influence of Poland, Austria, and Hungary, to East Ukraine, which gravitated towards Russia. Socialist Ukraine's industry burgeoned. Added to the production of metal and coal were aviation and rocketry, petrochemistry and power generation, 4 nuclear power plants, and defense sectors. It was as part of the USSR that Ukraine obtained not only the bulk of its present territory, but also its economic potential to become one of the top 10 European economies. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991 simultaneously destroyed the centuries-old economic integration of Ukraine and Russia, severing all economic, political, and cultural ties. Today, it is one of the poorest countries in Europe. Its manufacturing industry, with the exception of metallurgy, has been practically destroyed. Ukraine's economy stays afloat due to Western loans and remittances from people who have left for Europe and Russia in search of some kind of job. Living standards plummeted and immigration rocketed. About 10 million people out of 45 million people have left, the most highly qualified specialists. Ukraine has some of the highest levels of corruption and social differentiation. The country is on the brink of a national catastrophe. Okay. The government coup in Kiev as the basis of fomenting conflict. In February 2014, with the direct assistance of the USA and other NATO countries, a government coup took place in Ukraine. The legitimate government was overthrown. Neo-Nazis came to power. Subsequently, the USA admitted publicly that it had invested about $5 billion in preparing the change of regime in the country and in the development of democracy. Needless to say, no one would spend such a gigantic sum like that. As a result of the government coup, power was seized by people from Western Ukraine, from Galicia, where extreme nationalist, anti-Semitic, anti-Polish, Russophobic, and anti-communist sentiments have traditionally been strong. Forcible assimilation of the Russian-speaking population began. A ban on the Russian language and the decision to switch school education from Russian to Ukrainian met with powerful resistance in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. People rose up in arms. In the May 11, 2014 national referendum, 87% of the citizens voted for independence. Thus, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics were formed on the initiative of the popular mass and not on direction from the Kremlin. After several unsuccessful attempts to seize DPR-LPR, the Kiev Nazis, resorted to terror. During 8 years of continuing bombardment by heavy artillery, almost 14,000 civilians were killed and tens of thousands were maimed. The infrastructure was severely damaged. Throughout the long 8 years, the European countries and the USA looked on the genocide of the Russian people in Donbass with extreme equanimity, thus effectively justifying the actions of the Kiev regime. Today, the EU and USA are displaying unheard of hypocrisy, describing people suffering in the course of battles, but ignoring the fact that the use of civilians as human shields has become the standard practice of those whom they call freedom fighters. Okay, now it gets on to the development of neo-Nazi in Ukraine. Okay, so our comrades, in considering the situation in Ukraine, only reluctantly mention the danger of its fascization. And yet, one of the main goals of Russia's military occupation or operation in that country is its denazification. Even American congresspeople and special services admit that Ukraine has become the center of international neo-Nazism. Here are some facts. After Hitler's invasion of the USSR, as we have noted above, extreme nationalistic, anti-Semitic, Russophobic, and anti-communist sentiments in Western Ukraine were running high. SS divisions that were formed there fought the Red Army. Local nationalists, led by Semyon Bandera, an ardent Hitler fan, set about exterminating Jews. In Ukraine, Banderites slaughtered about 1.5 million Jews, 1/4 of all of the Holocaust victims. During the 1944 Volyn massacre in Western Ukraine, about 100,000 Poles were slaughtered. Banderites killed partisans and burned alive civilians in hundreds of Belarusian villages. After the war, anti-communist and anti-Soviet rebels in Western Ukraine, backed by the USA and Great Britain, launched terror against civilians in the period between 1945 and 1953. During those years, Banderites killed about 50,000 citizens. The descendants and successors of these thugs came to power after the 2014 coup. The tradition of anti-Polish, anti-Semitic, and anti-Russian terror is very strong among the neo-Nazis who practically run Ukraine today. Nazi ideology is being inculcated in Ukraine. Ukrainian fascists who organized and committed atrocities during the Second World War have been officially proclaimed national heroes. Their symbols have been adopted by the state. Marches in honor of fascist criminals are held every year. Streets and squares are being named after them. The Communist Party of Ukraine has been driven underground. Intimidation and assassination of politicians and journalists have become the order of the day. Monuments to Lenin and everything reminiscent of life in the USSR are being destroyed. Today, Banderites like the SD, storm troops in Germany, are the shock brigades of big business. They control every move of the government, constantly blackmailing it with the threat of a government coup. Okay, so now we get on to the present day, the nature of the present day Ukrainian state, okay, backed by the US. Okay. In terms of the Marxist theory, the military conflict in Ukraine cannot be described as an imperialist war, as our comrades would argue. It is essentially a national liberation war of the people of Donbass. From Russia's point of view, it is a struggle against an external threat to national security and against fascism. It is no secret that the Donbass militia was unable to resist the many thousand strong foreign-armed Ukrainian armed forces. A defeat of the militias would have led to the annihilation of the Russian-speaking population, a large proportion of which are citizens of Russia. Under the constitution of the RF, Russia took legitimate action to protect its citizens and ensure its national security because it could not have been done by other means. With the US and EU support, Kiev deliberately sabotages the negotiating process in the framework of the Minsk agreements. By that point in time, Ukraine had concentrated 150,000 servicemen and Nazi battalions in Donbass. Kiev, with US support, was getting set to regain control over Donbass by military means. With the blessing of its American principles, Ukraine was preparing to launch a military operation to seize Donbass and then Crimea in early March of this year. There is a solid body of evidence to confirm the existence of these plans. The Banderite regime has been preparing for this war for 8 years. Servicemen were subjected to relentless ideological brainwashing in the spirit of rank Russophobia. Powerful strongholds were being created, and the army was provided with the latest weaponry. In line with the imperialist geopolitical goals, the US was gradually drawing Ukraine into the sphere of its military interests, turning the country into a NATO spearhead determined to fight Russia up to the last Ukrainian soldier. As early as December 2021, Russia made a proposal to the US to hold talks on non-enlargement of NATO to the east. The Americans evaded giving a direct answer, so in January 2022, Russia warned that in this situation, it would have to take additional measures to protect its national security. Simultaneously, there was talk about deploying US tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Ukraine, which has 4 nuclear plants and a considerable scientific technical potential, started preparation for creating its own nuclear weapon. Under the Pentagon's patronage, Ukraine set up more than 30 labs to develop bacteriological weapons. There are documents to prove that these laboratories were working with particular dangerous bacteria of deadly diseases and were investigating methods of spreading them to target peoples of different races. All this poses a threat not only to Russia, but to the whole of humankind. It is claimed that this is all about inter-imperialist contradictions, or the struggle over markets and subsoil resources, inability to see the national component of class issues and the class component in national issues, leads into the territory of dogmatism. Okay, so interests of the Russian oligarchy in Ukraine or lack of the same. So seeking to provide that the war is being waged in the interests of the Russian bourgeoisie in order to seize Ukraine's natural resources and industrial potential, our comrades pluck Lenin's words about the nature of wars out of their historical context. However, the claim that the Russian leadership was preparing to seize Ukraine in advance contradicts facts. From the outset, the Russian leadership did not support the idea of a referendum on the formation of Donbas People's Republics. Following the Minsk II agreements, Russia, a priori, assumed that Donbass would remain part of Ukraine, albeit with a measure of autonomy. Until the beginning of the military operation, the Russian leadership insisted on compliance with Minsk II, which would leave Donbass as part of Ukraine. So where is preparation for imperialist seizure? Since 1991, Ukraine, its industry and resources were objects of super exploitation by US and EU monopolies. The Russian oligarchy did not take part in dividing the pie, which was in the sphere of Western interests. Moreover, the Russian oligarchy was against the military operation in Ukraine. It was striving to become integrated in the world oligarchy and was already under massive pressure from the West, which urged it to exert pressure on the government to induce it to preserve Russia's pro-Western orientation. Besides, the Russian oligarchs suffered considerably from the Russian military operation in Ukraine. They were put under sanctions and are seeing their palaces and yachts taken away from them and their bank accounts frozen. We do not have the slightest sympathy for those who have been plundering Russia for 3 decades and are now being deprived of their loot. We merely want to stress that the Russian oligarchy was not only not interested in the military operation, but has suffered from it. By refusing to back this operation, big business has lost not only its property and money, but its influence within the Russian ruling elite. Note, which class forces were the fiercest opponents of the Russian military operation in Ukraine? These were above all big monopoly capital, its political representatives in the liberal milieu, and their creative lackeys among the so-called intelligentsia. Of course, we recognize the existence of inter-imperialist contradictions, the desire of imperialist predators to seize the natural and energy resources of other countries. Russia is a victim of the West's plan to turn our country into a source of cheap raw materials. We have been opposing these plans for decades, but we do not believe that Russia, for all the flaws of its current political system based on the power of big capital, has overnight turned into such a predator. The struggle in Ukraine has a fundamentally different character, which defies dogmas. Okay, so we're coming on to the position. Yeah, we're nearly done here. Actually, I think we can finish this. The position of the CPRF. The CPRF was the first to define the nature of the regime which seized power in Ukraine during the Maidan protests in 2014. Thenceforth, all the party's activities have been based on the class essence of the ongoing political processes. We have always been critical of the Russian leadership's external policy, which effectively ignored the interests of the peoples, which until recently were part of the single Soviet state. Those who attentively follow our actions, and we assume that the Greek comrades are thoroughly conversant with our documents, will know that it was the CPRF that has since 2014 consistently called for the recognition of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. No other political party in Russia has done as much to support the population of Donbass. From the start, we supported the return of Donbass to Russia. It is not the CPRF that follows the line of the ruling United Russia Party and President Putin, but they, under the pressure of historical imperatives, have to follow the route which the CPRF has advocated for 3 decades. In this situation, it is fair to say that we almost blindly support Putin's policy in Ukraine. The Russian communists take the most... So 1 second. In this situation, is it fair to say that we almost blindly support Putin's policy in Ukraine? The Russian communists take the most active part in protecting the LPR-DPR. Hundreds of Communist Party members are fighting the Nazis as members of the armed forces of these republics. Dozens of communists have died in this struggle. The CPRF has, during these past 8 years, sent to these 3 republics 93 convoys carrying 13,000 tons of humanitarian aid and hosted thousands of children who came to Russia for rest and medical treatment. All these past years, the CPRF has been urging the Russian leadership to recognize the independence of Donbass. Frankly, we are not pleased to hear our Greek comrades speak with a touch of disdain about so-called People's Republics of Donbass, because these are precisely People's Republics, which came into being as a result of expressed will of the people. The citizens of LPR-DPR have defended them at the cost of thousands of civilian and military lives over the 8 grim years of resistance to the creeping aggression of Banderite Nazis. It is a matter of signal importance that fighting the Banderites are not only the Russian army, but also the militia units of Donbass itself, among whom communists and mining workers form a large stratum. Where do you see the protection of the interests of the oligarchy? Are our comrades who daily expose their lives to mortal danger also defending the interests of the Russian oligarchs? Or to defend the interests of common people who have become victims of neo-Nazis who have seized power in Ukraine? One has to be very reluctant to see the real state of affairs to claim that the CPRF is acting in line with the ruling group. The pitch of class political struggle in Russia is as ever high. Persecution of communists and party supporters, even after the start of the military operation in Ukraine, shows that there is no class harmony between the CPRF and the present ruling elite. One can cite many examples of our comrades being subjected to repressions. Our response to the persecution of our comrades is robust. By the same token, we are vehement critics of the government's socio-economic policy. No other party in Russia can claim that it has been a more active critic of the authorities. Over the 30-odd years since the anti-communist coup of 91, we have provided ample proof of our resolute struggle against the ruling elite. That is why our party enjoys such broad support of the masses. In the September 2021 elections for the State Duma, the CPRF won almost 19% of the votes, and this in spite of the well-oiled and long-established marches of vote rigging. We are confident that the actual levels of popular support is substantially higher. This is because, in the spirit of Marxism-Leninism, we seek to study the interests and mood of the people. Incidentally, by supporting this Russian special operation in Ukraine, the CPRF has expressed the will of the overwhelming majority of Russian citizens. As for claims about courting nationalist approaches and nationalist forces, we are proud to declare that the CPRF is the leading patriotic left force in Russia. We deem it to be our internationalist duty to protect the interests of the Russian people and the other people who have lived for centuries together with the Russians, above all the Ukrainians and the Belarusians. Denying the historical significance of the Russians' world or the Russian civilization is, in our view, as absurd as denying the great significance of the ancient Greek civilization. When Manolis Glezos tore down the Nazi flag atop the Acropolis, he was not guided only by class interests, but also by the national pride of the Greeks who had launched a resolute struggle against the German occupation. Okay, so I'm not going to read one paragraph. Okay, I'll read the final paragraph. It's been very long. Okay. Attitude of the world community to events in Ukraine.
God, all right.
Yeah. While the Western politicians and the media who arrogantly claim to represent the world community openly take the side of the neo-Nazis, major countries in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, which have first experience of European and American neocolonialism, quite rightly see the events in Ukraine as Russia's struggle against the US-led unipolar world. The countries that are home to 60% of the planet's population either support the Russian operation or take a neutral stance. Only those who in 1941 brought war to our country as members of the Hitler coalition take an aggressive stand. These are the countries of Europe, as well as the USA, Great Britain, which have contributed a great deal to the revival of the Nazi military machine after its defeat in the First World War. Today, Russia is again fighting fascism and those who support in Europe and the USA. Remembering the heroic deeds of the Communist Party of Greece in the struggle against Nazism and against the military dictatorship, we categorically brush aside the idea that our comrades could have consciously joined the camp of those who today try to crush Russia with Ukraine's hands. We reiterate our profound respect for the KKE as a party, which has made an immense contribution to the revival of the international communist and workers' movements after the collapse of USSR in 1991. However, the words of our comrades sometimes sound like the statement of the ultimate truth. We are for a comradely dialogue, which has always helped communists all over the world to understand the essence of events and work out their correct, genuine Marxist approach to their assessment. Okay, wow, it was quite the document. Thoughts? Right.
Okay, so a few things. One is that what people don't tend to understand is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia became a resource colony for the West with a comprador bourgeois class, led by, of course, no other than Boris Yeltsin. But the democratic system of the Russian government also allows the Russian Duma to be a place of the will of the people. So Putin is, forced. His hand is forced by the will of the Russian people, which includes the Russian socialists and communists, in order to, conduct this special military operation. And, Russia, just like any other society, is not a filthy society where it's just like one god king and the extension of his consciousness is the rest of the country. Like, come on, that is so orientalist to a level that is just unacceptable. And yes, I am talking about the
Right.
KKE, which now comes the second part,
Hmm.
which is that the KKE, along with a lot of other so-called Marxists, have reached a level of ultra dogmatism to the point where they are actually the so undialectical. And so, Marx said specific situations require specific analysis. This is something that every Chinese middle schooler, ever since 7th grade, knows. And yet, a lot of Western communists and just communists all over the world doesn't understand this concept.
Context.
And resort to things like everything is imperialism. Anti-imperial, as long as it's a country with tanks and missiles, that's imperialism.
Right.
There is no and for them it is this kind of mentality that as long as there is a market, it's imperialism. As long as there is religion, it's imperialism. If there is even original unique culture and civilizational values, that's imperialism too. It's this kind of extremely anti-people perspective that disregards the material condition, disregards the will of the people, disregards the social zeitgeist, disregards everything Hegel, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao talks about. Instead, just quote dump. This is a level of and dismiss the idea that there is a human psyche, that the people can be manipulated, that the United States have been doing ever since MK Ultra, has been researching narrative warfare to manipulate the hearts and minds of the people, that the people, the proletariat, are not saints. They're just regular people who can be manipulated just like you and me. And it's a very objective and material process, and they simply don't admit that. I've personally had Maoists and this kind of ultras tell me that, for example, in the Kazakhstan whole uprising, that color revolutions don't exist. That every single uprising is just the will of the people. This level of ignorance, selective ignorance, even, which is implying evil, is unacceptable. It is anti-people to anti-proletariat to book worshipping to an unacceptable degree that they have become the propaganda wing of the CIA.
Yeah, that's also an effective
So
role.
if anything, the KPRF wasn't harsh enough on the KKE and the kinds and their kind, and
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's not a time to make splits. It's never okay. There are times for splits, but I think I agree with not being too harsh on them right now. I think that the document, like what they said, is pretty condemning anyway. I think they make their point very strong. Yeah, I think in terms of this whole idea of imperialism, right? So we've discussed this before. Like we looked at the definition. If we did the quote thing, right? You look at a quote from Lenin, you go, well, what are the 5 categories or how a country becomes imperialist? We looked at that, and it was already lacking at that point. But this point that the CPRF makes in this document about the fact that Russia wanted the Minsk II agreements, which kept the DPR and LPR as a part of Ukraine with some degree of autonomy and whatnot. But so the idea that Russia, this is a sign of Russian imperialism, Russian expansion, ignores 8 years of negotiation, where they spent, how many hours and again, years trying to keep the Donbass in Ukraine. And we're happy for that to be the case. Sure, with like sort of constitutional elements to it, but nonetheless still a part of Ukraine. So the idea that this is just merely a grab ignores those two, like that fact, that 8-year-old fact of the fact that they were negotiating and didn't want to have even handed over. But I think I'm not going to try and re-stress the points made there. I think they made great, strong points already. So if you'd like, we can move on to Turkey. So Turkey has blocked Sweden and potentially also, I think, Finland's attempt to join NATO. So the stated reason, public stated reason, which I think is the reason, is that Sweden has sanctioned in the past Turkey for human rights violations and whatnot, but particularly, sorry, for the attempted coup in Turkey that happened, I think, 6 years ago or so. But in addition to that, Sweden also has Kurdish Workers' Party members in Sweden, and Turkey is demanding that they declare the Kurdish Workers' Party as a terrorist organization. So Turkey is basically saying you can join NATO if you do these two things, which is quite I mean, that's a pretty I don't know what the Swedish are going to do in relation to that. It's quite and the fact that they made it public is I'm quite surprised.
Yeah.
I thought that they would have been if they wanted to found a flag. Go ahead.
So essentially, Turkey is a NATO member, part of this, missile launch pad against Russia and other, peoples of the world kind of idea. But Turkey is also its own entity, its own kind of conceptual society, where United States also funds all sorts of things, such as the Kurds, as well as other groups in Syria to be against Turkey, because they also have a degree of independence and indigeneity to them as well, despite being a NATO country. So this is just a playing out of this conflict, even within the structural framework of NATO, right? We've known that Turkey never kind of fully got along with the NATO imperative. They wanted to buy S-400 missiles because U.S. wouldn't sell them F-35 and so on and so forth. This is just yet another case of that happening. Essentially, Turkey, though also fairly chauvinistic of a country and pretty extremist and populist, what have you, borderline religious, but it has a different interest, a different imperative than the imperialist West. So, in that sense, this is what we saw. Turkey sees that it's not in their interest to have this happen and to escalate. Turkey has always played a side of trying to pacify the whole, conflict ever since the special military operation started, and this is yet another part for their own interest and for the sake of peace, as they've said before, to try to not escalate the whole situation. And luckily, for a country to join NATO, it needs to have unanimous vote, right? So both Turkey and Croatia voted against this, which good. Like, that is the kind of whatever reason you're doing it from, if it is de-escalating and not adding fuel to the fire of the dumpster that is the war, then that's a good thing. Yeah, that's all I can say on this.
No, I think you're right. Yes, Croatia also has said. Let's see here. President Zoran Milanovic told the N1 TV channel that he would instruct the country's permanent representative to NATO to vote against this move. So this is from a day ago. This is from May 19th. The reason for this one is, of course, Croats in Bosnia are being destroyed as a political entity, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, there's no more comment for this one here on this particular article I'm reading. But yes, Croatia also saying they'll block the move. So I think that, I don't know if that means Sweden and Finland's bids are dead, but it certainly doesn't look good. I think when it was only Turkey, it seemed like maybe that can be overcome if they make some concessions. But if Croatia's adding to it, then it makes it more complicated. So we'll yet to see. I mean, at least domestically, Sweden and Finland are happy to make the move. Which, to be honest, you could have a situation which is kind of already there, in the sense that you can have NATO troops in Sweden and Finland, as well as missiles, without being part of NATO, right? So Finland can quite comfortably just say, okay, we're not part of NATO, but you can put a military base on the border. You can put a U.S. military base. You can put a U.S. launch pad. It's their right to declare that. Yeah. So there could be a third option here where that happens. And also the fact that Finland right now is doing military exercises with NATO countries. So in a sense, it's already in the sphere of NATO. And this vote, this thing of like, let's become formal members, sure, that makes it more like, the border is certainly harder. But right now, I'd say that they already are. There's a NATO creep, right? So there's already NATO has already bled into or leaked into Finland and Sweden militarily anyway. So that could be a third route here. So the idea of that, or second route, they don't join NATO formally, but they independently, unilaterally then say, okay, or bilaterally say to the US, you can have nukes on our border, no problem. You can put a Patriot missile battery here and THAAD or whatever you want here. That could also happen too. So that's the NATO news. The US has invaded Somalia, apparently. So have you heard about this, Jen?
Yup.
Okay, so what are your thoughts? So let me just read
the United States is sending 500, 700, I believe, soldiers to Somalia again.
I'll read it for you here. So it's Biden approves plan to redeploy several hundred ground forces into Somalia. There we go. Yeah, let's see. 700 ground troops. Yes. Hold a second. No, so 1 second. So there were already troops there. So Biden has signed an order to authorize the military once again to redeploy hundreds of special operations forces inside Somalia.
Yeah, it's what is that going to do? Like, please, like, 700 soldiers on a peacekeeping mission with like shitty vehicles that are top heavy and easy to flip over and will crush your neck, and soldiers who only know like how to fight with rifles and 40mm grenade launchers and light machine guns, but like literally does not understand anything else. Soldiers who like freeze when they get shot at and doesn't understand like you need to take cover and return fire and fire and maneuver. Even you just get pinned down in a place and nobody can like even return fire. Like, what use is sending 700 people for? Because like I guarantee you, like it's not going to be 700 all like frontline fighters. At least 300 of them.
I mean, to be honest, I believe it's special operations.
And then you're creating more hassle than you can handle. Like, what on earth is this? Is this stupidity and evil at the same time?
I don't know about that, but yeah. So we'll see. I mean, it's it's the Middle East, the US. It's just sort of rubber stamping things we already know. Like the US does special forces operations all over North Africa and all over the Middle East all the time. So this is just this is a common this is a reality. It's just us acknowledging reality that the US has got troops in Somalia. But I mean, 700. I guess it's a public declaration of permanent troops in Somalia. Let's hope they don't have a Black Down Hawk moment. So anyway, I think we have
remember only a year ago, before the United States economy has deteriorated to its current state, it was only able to have enough logistics to maintain 3 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles in Syria for like a few months, less than half a year. And then they couldn't even upkeep the logistics to maintain three vehicles. Okay, not even as a show of force, they can't even do it. So then, like, what is this? What on earth is this then?
Yeah.
Like, we're not even talking about the moral issue. Like, of course it's messed up. Of course it's evil. But like, it's stupid, even from an American perspective.
Yeah. I think the other thing to think about here is the French have been doing this kind of special forces operation, small light infantry units in Mali and Burkina Faso and all over the place in West Africa. And I mean, they had some limited successes in the early years, pushing them out of the capitals and stuff. But in recent years, they've been pulling back. And one of the demands,
remember how easily special forces were ambushed and killed by just a pickup truck convoy by ISIS in West Africa?
Yeah. No. So the thing here is that they've been pulling back lately. So there's been limitations and like failures on those operations. So the French have actually been pulling those troops back. Because of the failure, sort of like not achieving objectives, but also the West African governments have been asking them to leave, to get out. And to bring in the Russian element, they've also been then calling in the Russians. And I think in one of the coups back in earlier this year, but when there were like 12 different coups across West Africa and Central Africa.
Yeah. The one you talked about where the military general speaks on TV.
Right. That's it. Yeah. But the Burkina Faso, one of the protests in the protest, and the people protesting the street after having overthrown the government, or the military had overthrown the government, was they're saying, bring the Russians in. We want the Russians here to deal with the Islamists. And this is where you get like the whole Wagner group and these guys who have been successful in the Central African Republic. So I don't know, unless these 700 like special forces guys, these US ones, have learned some tricks from the Wagner group. I don't know if they'll be as successful in Somalia dealing with Al-Shabaab and whatnot. But anyway, let's move on. We've got to cover still some big stories. We're actually over time here, but the statement from Antonio Guterres. So 1.7 billion people could be pushed into hunger and poverty. This is from Antonio Guterres himself. We discussed this to an extent last week. So the Ukraine crisis, the grain, the fertilizer from Russia, and also knock-on effects, right?
Yeah.
Is India is limiting wheat exports. So I think we should sort of put these together.
This is a continuation, clearly, of the theme from last week of hunger and plague and chaos, right?
Yeah.
India, as we've predicted, with that kind of insanely high temperature, they probably won't even have enough food to feed themselves. So they're stopping wheat exports, and so that's the wheat. And like Germany and EU immediately criticized India for not exporting wheat to Europe. Like how, like to pull like a meme quote, how dare you? Like this is one of those situations where like you can actually. Thank you, Dust James. This is one of those situations where, like, you could actually say that, when the people themselves are starving, why do they have a duty to export to you? They're not your serfs, And then we are seeing, due to all of this artificial chaos, we are having this kind of 1.7 billion people are going to face a famine. Right. And there's just the problems are yet to come, right? Like the huge story right after last week's episode was the baby formula shortage in the United States.
Yes.
Like, good God, that is, I mean, like as someone from China, like we know, like there is a lot of things that you can do to kind of counter that. Even if you can't do breastfeeding, you can do things like soups that are rich in protein that you boil out of fish and whatever, and then like you can like boil a little bit rice and a lot of water to like get some starch, glucose to be fed to the baby, right? Like these kind of like half-assed measures that you can kind of do. But like still, it's showing that and a colleague of ours. Told us that there has been massive fires across Europe and the United States in food storage depots. So all of these, and there were like freaking TikTok conspiracy videos of, but like it's American farmers talking about how the top fertile topsoils of their farms were being bought up and just dug away and dumped away by the U.S. government. As to damage U.S. agriculture. So it's this kind of semi-natural, semi-artificial kind of mass chaos of hunger and disease. Right, by disease we mean like the incompetence of COVID management is definitely artificial. I mean, we're not going to dive into the conspiracy of where COVID came from, but like the incompetence in terms of management is definitely artificial. That's something completely manual. And in addition, so this week we have two more news. One is the update on the bird flu that's been spreading in the United States. It has now spread to New Jersey, a very populated place. This bird flu infects humans as well and outright kills chickens and ducks. People, that's all food. Like that is literally all food source. Chickens and ducks serve a very important place in the human agricultural chain ever since antiquity. because they digest grains and food scraps that we are not able to consume. And if you feed them that, then they turn it into protein, such as eggs, or when they get old, they can no longer lay eggs, or if it's a male, then like you kill them for meat, and then it's very delicious and nutritious. That's what we do in China, right? Literally every person that grew up in a village knows how to kill their own, gut their own fish and kill their own chicken. This, like, if this is all to just like go away, like food prices are already going up in the United States. How much worse, like, is life going to be? A lot actually. And combine this with there's currently a monkeypox. It's like
monkeypox
outbreak all across the world.
What is monkeypox?
Now, even in so-called developed countries here in the West.
Yeah, I just want to see what is monkeypox. So, monkeypox belongs to the family of pox viruses.
Are you going to show an image, Richard? It's quite disturbing if you are.
No, don't worry. I don't. That's quite nasty. Okay, no, I'm not gonna show the pictures then. Okay, so I assume it's like a flesh.
Okay. All right.
Flesh kind of thing, right?
Okay.
Right. So, among lab monkeys in 1958, the first monkeypox case in human was diagnosed in 1970. Okay, so it's common to the DRC and Nigeria, of course, than 200. So they get like 200 cases a year or 500 cases in 2017. So the one identified in the US and European cases tends to produce milder disease than the other common branch of the virus. Of all the virus strains that we're aware of among all of these cases that have occurred in the last 2 weeks are the West African clade. The West African clade of monkeypox is much more benign than the Congo Basin clade. Okay. Yeah, so around 1% of people who contract West African
it was found in monkeys, but present in a lot of species, which includes us.
Yeah. Right, okay. So that's pretty bad. So monkeypox and bird flu and food shortages and all sorts of other terrible news. So yeah, the other thing we wanted to cover was that so the other thing we want to cover was the Sri Lankan situation, but we have actually run out of time. So we're going to have to cover that next week, the Sri Lanka situation. So we've got a wonderful article from the communists to read for that one. And it gives a more of a detail about finance capital, about the IMF and the World Bank and whatnot. But we don't have time to do it this week. We have to close. So we're going to have to read that next week. But I'm sure that the situation in Sri Lanka will not be resolved within the next 7 days. And if you do have any other stuff or any other things you want us to research or investigate or comment on, we've already got this conversation about Turkey and Erdogan and
please leave a comment and we will respond just like we do in today.
Right, exactly. So if we want to look into that about Erdogan. So last week we had a comment about Taiwan and we commented on that. So if you have any of the stuff, please just mention it. And if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe, hit notifications bell. And also our podcast is still going. We'll be putting this on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening and or watching, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you all.
Cool. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.